Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Squarespace. I'm wearing a really incredible vintage Cartier today. And this watch is actually in my personal collection. And the story's very long. It starts back in 1904, but it gets really, really interesting about 2 years ago when I bought this watch and in the course of a couple of months made over $20,000 in value on it. But I can't sell it. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. So let's go back to 1904, the origin of the Santos collection. Now, this watch is called a Cartier Santos Carree, but back in 1904, that word Carree wasn't associated. This was just a Santos Dumont. Now, Santos Dumont actually was the surname of a famous Brazilian pilot and socialite, Albert Santos Dumont. And he was a really close friend of Louis Cartier, again, in all those very wealthy social circles. And when he complained to Cartier the difficulty of using pocket watches during a flight, oh, how hard, miserable, and cumbersome it must have been, Cartier had an idea for a wristwatch. Now, this is one of the very first wristwatches ever recorded. Sources do argue if it was the first wristwatch, but so far as modern history is concerned and pop culture, this watch, this idea that began with a complaint from a famous socialite and pilot, gave way to the world's first produced watch and watch collection that would not only change the course of watch history and events, but still today, 120 years later, be manufactured. What's particularly interesting about this wristwatch is not only was it forward-thinking in its technology, putting a watch and mechanism on a man's wrist, but it was also forward-thinking in its conceptual design. It was also very forward-thinking in its kind of conceptual approach to design and to jewelry and to watchmaking. Louis Cartier brought in the idea of industrial design into the world of what is essentially functional jewelry. This is something that hadn't been done before and rarely was done since. In fact, that whole idea and concept didn't really become popularized until the 1970s when Gerald Genta introduced the Royal Oak for Audemars Piguet and then a few years later the Nautilus for Patek Philippe. Really, it was Louis Cartier that thought to join these two opposite but juxtaposed ideas. So fast forward 74 years and Cartier was at a crossroads. Cartier did not have a watch like some of their competitors that was really embraced by the mass market. Cartier production numbers were very small and their watches were very expensive and very fine. Cartier, in a change of leadership from above, needed something that really could become a part of aspirational but mass culture. They didn't have this yet. And instead of designing something entirely new, Cartier looked back into their archive, looked back to that first wristwatch they had ever made, that Santos Dumont. But this time, reimagined it for the time and era that it's now being reimagined in. What would a Santos look like in the late 70s? How different is culture? How different are people and behaviors? What is cool in 78 is very different than what was cool in 1904, right? And aspirational and desirable. So Cartier had the idea for this Santos Carree. And while certainly a Santos through and through, while certainly connected to that lineage, it had a totally new approach, an aggressive, masculine approach. Cartier doubled down on that industrial side, right? And now let's start to take a look at this watch I've got on my wrist. Before I continue with this amazing Cartier story, let's take a quick 60-second break and thank our sponsor for today's video over at Squarespace. Had it not been for Squarespace, I certainly wouldn't be sitting here today. Squarespace's ability to offer website templates and domains is second to none. I have tried their competitors. I won't name them, but I've tried them, and nobody beats Squarespace's templates, functionality, and ability to build incredible websites that really look like you've spent tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Yes, of course, you could, if you have the resources, go allocate $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 to a website in a breeze. Some people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars. But when I tell you a Squarespace site through their template system looks from day one like you've been around and funded and professional for years, it's unbelievable. Squarespace is really one of the reasons, and certainly the only company that I would say is in large part responsible for our success here at Theo and Harris. And now with their new Fluid Engine system, they allow you to drag and drop and manage your site with the easy click of a couple of buttons. It's really amazing. Last but not least, it's their customer support that allows you to feel comfortable and safe and educated throughout the entire process. So head on over to squarespace.com/Theo Harris to save 10% off of your first website or domain. Head on over today and make your business all the better. Back to Cartier. Now, I own this watch both in two-tone and in Salo 18-karat yellow gold. This watch was always a dream watch of mine. I had thought about it and fawned over it before I even got into this business professionally. So we're going back about 12 years ago. I thought it was just peak decadence and wealth and kind of ostentatious and masculine. There was something very controlling and abrasive and powerful about this watch. And I, as a young man, a young irreverent man, really wanted to be that sort of person that, was kind of unapologetically in power, right? That Gordon Gekko idea. And Gordon Gekko wore this watch. Right? These ideas, I think, were really embodied in the Santos Carree better than other watches of the era, right? Better than the Day-Date, which, while beautiful and an everlasting design, sure, was even a little bit more, it's more sporty than the Carree. This is more industrial, but it's so thin and elegant and bizarre, right? Something that really hadn't been seen before. Now, these models in solid 18-karat yellow gold were few and far between. The stainless steel and two-tone were far more common. And by the way, even though their metals aren't as precious and the watches aren't as heavy, these are fantastic watches that have gone up quite a bit in price. When I first got my two-tone Santos Carree, I think I paid $2,700 or $2,500. Now those watches are over $5,000 in value. They've doubled. But this watch, I think I paid a little over $11,000 for, and now it's worth about $30,000, which is insane. And I'll tell you for sure, in some of my weaker moments, I've looked at the watch and said, well, I don't wear it enough to, for it to be worth $30,000. That's a lot of money to me, right? I could sell it and buy $30,000 or $20,000 of other things and put money in my pocket, right? And then when I put it on, when I feel it on my wrist, and I think that this B-roll makes this clear, it's just so unique and unlike anything really you've ever seen before. Again, it's that balance between decadence and industrial design, something completely unique and oxymoronic, very much like Cartier in their Aldo Cipulo period, through their Justin Clou and through their love bracelet, and what they've done many years later now with their Ecru collection, right? These rotating nuts on these gold bracelets, which are functional, by the way. It's really amazing. So bringing us into the close of today's conversation, some watches, this watch is a great example. Well, I was almost going to say no matter what they're worth. I think I may have a limit, right? But it's hard when you're such a watch enthusiast, right? Such a poetic lover and enthusiast of wristwatches to really look at the numbers for what they are and to see clearly, right? By all logic, I should get rid of this watch, right? I bought it when it was, much more affordable, right? $11,000 is a ton of money, of course, God knows, but 30 is absurd, right? 30 is an absurd number. And I certainly wouldn't pay $30,000 for this watch. Not to say it's not worth 30. I think it's worth actually more than 30,000. I think it will be worth more than 30,000. But that just represents too much of, right, the budget that I would allocate toward my watch collecting hobby at this point. But the point is, watches like this, watches that had a perspective that was so specific and on point, right? The expression, you hit the nail on the head, and they did in 1978. That's why Cartier captured the attention of the world and has continued to today. And I don't think we'll see a Santos ever again that is as collectible as these watches. I don't think Cartier will ever do it again, okay? They make beautiful Santos watches now, but they're produced in far larger quantity, and they will always, in my view, trade below retail. I don't think those watches will ever appreciate the way that a collectible from the origin, right, of the model line back in the late 70s or the early 80s, right, as well as they will. These are the real deal. They're the real McCoy in old Cutty Sark brand speak. These watches are unbelievable. So yes, while I did factually make $20,000 or appreciate $20,000 in value in my collection by buying this watch, unfortunately for my pocket, I will never realize those gains. And so goes on the world of vintage watch collecting. That's it. I hope you guys liked this episode. I hope you enjoyed the B-roll of this beautiful, beautiful watch. It is a rare treat to see one. And if you see me on the street, there's a pretty good chance I'm wearing this. Not in New York City, but anywhere locally here in suburban New Jersey. You might see me sporting this around. Anyway. That's it, everybody. If you enjoyed this episode, please go ahead and like it. And if you want more content from Theo and Harris, go ahead and subscribe to our channel at The Zero. We release podcasts every week and share behind-the-scenes looks into the watch industry and the Theo and Harris company. I hope to see you on all over there soon.